China is a land of majestic mountains and ancient myths, but beyond the well-known tourist routes lie dozens of little-known ridges, wooded slopes, and secluded temples that escape the attention of the mass traveler. These places are not advertised in guidebooks and are rarely featured on social media. There are no long lines and crowds at lookouts, but there are silence, mists, ancient trails, and mountain villages where time has almost stopped. In such places, you can hear the sound of pine forests on the slope, the sound of temple bells echoing in the gorge, the sound of clouds underfoot in the early morning. Locals have known these mountains since birth, passing down stories of spirits resting in the rocks, of monks hidden in caves, and of ancient paths traveled by pilgrims and poets. Each of these hidden mountain worlds has its own character. Somewhere sharp, rocky peaks, somewhere soft, misty ridges covered with pine trees. There are places where your breath stops not from the height, but from the feeling that you are in contact with something untouched, real, almost forgotten. What if China's most mesmerizing mountains aren't the ones on postcards? This list brings together 60 mysterious and little-explored mountain regions of China, from the wild ridges of Yunnan to the rocky gorges of Sichuan, from the quiet slopes of the Orient to the snow-capped plateaus near Tibet. It is an invitation to peek behind the scenes of landscapes that hold the pristine beauty, peace, and breath of the ages. Wishan Mountains, Fujian-Jiangxi borderland, tea terraces and mystical myths. On the mountainsides are terraces where the famous Oolong de Hong Pao, a tea shrouded in legend, is grown. In the early morning, fog drifts between the trees, turning the landscape into a shimmering space without horizon. Porters with wicker baskets filled with fragrant leaves walk along narrow paths. The sound of water and the light tinkling of cicadas mingle with the distant beats of wooden hammers in the tea shops. The local tea houses are made without nails, just wood, clay, and hand masonry. The walls hold the damp aroma of dried leaves and quiet conversations in half voices. Below, at the foot, the Jukushi River flows, flowing into the crevices between the stone gates. In the evenings, wooden boats with paper lanterns on their bows glide along it. The Feng Huangshan Mountains, Hebei Province, are wild cliffs and ancient cave temples. The sharp crests of the mountains remind of frozen dragons. Their silhouettes stand out sharply against the sky. Temples with stone gates decorated with bas-reliefs and hieroglyphs erased by time are carved into the rocks. Staircases lead up to the temples, sometimes almost vertically, among the foliage and tree roots. Travelers are rarely seen here, and only the wind plays with prayer flags at the cave entrances. Some caves are connected by secret passages going deep into the ridge. Inside them, it is cold even in summer. The walls are covered with the patina of time and thin cracks. In the semi-darkness, you can see the outlines of statues carved directly into the stone. According to legends, monks used to come here for decades to disappear into the silence of the rocks. Lungashan, Jiangxi, is a place of Taoist legends and silence. Lungashan is associated with the ancient schools of Taoist alchemy, and you can still find hermits in the mountains. The mountains are hidden behind a misty veil, and trails lead to lost temples and rock grottos. The tiled roofs of pavilions hide in the thickets, where only the rustle of leaves and the gurgling of springs can be heard. The moss-covered stone slabs lead deeper and deeper into the silence. On some ledges there are old elixir furnaces, now abandoned, but traces remain. The locals call these places the land of no sound, because even the birds sing more softly here. The Lushuai River meanders slowly among the rocks, reflecting scraps of clouds. Some areas are protected and off-limits to ordinary travelers for meditation and rituals that have not changed since the Han period. Mengsishan, Yunnan. Highland rice terraces among the clouds. The terraces look like mirrors nested inside each other, reflecting the sky and clouds. After rain, water flows down the steps, creating shimmers of silver and green. At the edge of each step are sticks with rag flags to scare away birds. Villages are pressed against the slopes, roofs blackened by time and smoke from chimneys rising straight up into the clouds. Here live the Yao and Hani peoples, who have been working the land by hand for centuries. At the beginning of spring, masked dances are held in the valleys, bringing gifts to the spirits of the land. The streams do not stop even at night. The water gurgles while the stars are reflected in the mirrored fields. In the morning, you can hear the guttural chatter of the villagers picking rice sprouts with the precision of surgeons. Yuntashan Mountains, Henan Province. Waterfalls, forests, and little-known caves. Mountain streams weave into cascades that hide in thickets of ferns and bamboo. Beneath the cliffs are deep caves with water dripping from the vaults and tiny stalactites. Travelers often hear only their footsteps and the sounds of nature. It's almost always deserted. Some caves lead to underground halls, where the sound of water and the echo of footsteps can be heard. Inscriptions from the Tang dynasty carved by pilgrims can be found on the walls. The Yuntai waterfalls cascade down the steep ledges, with a rainbow constantly hanging over them. On one of the trails are the remains of watchtowers built as part of an old defense line. The Zhongnanshan Mountains, Shanxi, are hermitages and monasteries on cliffs. The monasteries are built into the rocky cliffs, their balconies hanging over the abyss. The hermits live in cells hollowed out in the rocks, where the window openings are just holes in the rock. Sturdy wooden railings lead along the ledges, and in the mornings the monks build fires and stoves and cook rice. At sunset, the peaks turn amber and the sky seems close. Lichunshan Mountain, Yunnan, is a place where Tibetan and Chinese cultures meet. Tibetan prayer flags and Chinese-style pagodas coexist here, and the inhabitants speak different languages. In the evenings, the sound of drum and bells can be heard in the villages, rituals that unite the two traditions. Houses made of wood and stone frame narrow streets where shepherds walk with yaks. The mountain peaks, snow-capped even in summer, are visible from anywhere in the village. The Zhuhua Mountains, Anhui, are Buddhist temples far away from the noisy pilgrimages. There are no crowded queues, only the ringing of bells echoing in silence. The monasteries are hidden in greenery, with carved gates and the scent of incense. At morning services, the sounds of sutra recitations and rhythmic drum beats can be heard. Beyond the temples, trails leading into the forest where wild deer can be found. Mount Taihangshan, Henan, Shaanxi. Terraces, canyons, and hanging villages. Villages literally hang from rock ledges, connected by bridges and ladders laid by hand. The walls of the houses are painted in clay color. The roofs are covered with heavy tiles. Below are fields terraced down to the river. The canyons here drop into the abyss, and in clear weather you can see the clouds floating right under your feet. The battling mountains outside the Great Wall are little-known trails and peaks. Away from the hiking trails, the stone steps are overgrown with grass and moss. Remnants of fortifications are hidden in the forest, where trees have sprouted through the ancient masonry. Peaks with sharp summits rise above the pine forests, on which almost no man has ever set foot. Complete silence reigns here, broken only by the cries of birds and the rustling of leaves. Shenengjia Mountains, Hubei, wildlife and legends of Bigfoot. In the dense forests of Shenengjia, shrouded in frequent fogs, only the rustling of leaves and the cries of rare birds can be heard. Golden monkeys and leopards are found here, and old-timers tell of a mysterious creature resembling Bigfoot. Narrow paths lead to waterfalls hidden in deep gorges where no tourist has ever set foot. The area is considered sacred. According to legend, Shennong himself, the mythical herbalist emperor, used to gather herbs here. Jinshan Mountain, Jiangsu, temples and forests on the banks of the Yangtze River. Ancient pagodas stand on the slopes of Mount Jinshan, overlooking the wide Yangtze River. There is peace here, disturbed only by the ringing of bells and the rustling of leaves in the old cedar forest. Moss-covered stone staircases lead to secluded temples, where monks lead a measured life. The place was favored by Tang poets who left inscriptions on the rocks. The Wudangshan Mountains, Hubei, are the less touristy part of the sacred Taoist massif. On the northern slopes of Wudangshan, far from the main pilgrimage routes, stand abandoned Taoist pavilions, partially swallowed by the forest. The only sounds heard here are the wind passing between the pines and the echoes of ancient prayers that once resounded within these walls. Trails serpentine up to the peaks, where stone arches disappear into the mist. Wudangshan is renowned as the birthplace of martial arts, but outside the popular trails there is complete solitude. Mount Beitaishan, Shaanxi. Hidden monasteries and rock-cut steps. The Beitaishan escarpment rises above the trees, and almost invisible from the outside, trails lead to cliff-hidden monasteries. Hand-carved steps lead up steep walls, plunging over the abyss. The cells are built into the rock, and in the morning light they seem to float above the ground. The hermits still live here, observing a strictly secluded way of life. The Aba Mountains, Sichuan, are Tibetan villages and monasteries in the mountains. Scattered on the high plateaus of Aba are villages with Tibetan flags fluttering in the wind. Stone stupas decorated with paintings are found just off the road. In the monasteries, mantras resound and monks in dark maroon robes circumambulate prayer circles. In winter, the entire valley is covered in snow, and only the smoke from the stovepipes tells of life inside the houses. Gully-Gongshan Mountain, Yunnan, is a wilderness near the border with Myanmar. Gully-Gongshan is protected as a nature reserve, and there are species found here that are found nowhere else in China. The forests resemble a jungle, with lianas, dewdrops, and birdsong. Ice streams flow deep into the gorges and orchids grow on the slopes. The region is difficult to access and some places can only be reached on foot or by mule. Lingshan Mountains, Sichuan, is the land of the Yi people. Lingshan is home to the Yi people, who have preserved their customs and language. Mountain trails pass wooden houses with carved shutters and terraces where corn is dried. The scenery alternates between narrow gorges with mountain streams and flat plateaus with pastures. On the slopes, there are sacred places where rituals are performed, which are closed to outsiders. Ermishan Mountain, Sichuan, non-tourist trails and monasteries in the mist. Outside of the main trails, Ermishan hides paths leading to small monasteries among the forest. The fogs here are thick and the pine trees seem to dissolve into a white haze. Stone steps wind up the slope, winding among the centuries-old trees. Occasionally, a macaque crosses the road. The local inhabitants are accustomed to rare travelers. Zhangjiajie Mountain outside the main park are quiet canyons and rock towers. Away from the famous tourist route, Zhangjiajie Mountain hides valleys with tall stone towers wrapped in vegetation. There are almost no people here, and only the echoes echo the footsteps. The rock walls go to the sky, forming labyrinths where it is easy to lose your bearings. Transparent streams flow nearby, in which the mountain spires are reflected. Sanqingshan Mountains, Jiangxi, crystalline rock forms and rare species. The Sanqingshan rocks glisten under the sun like crystals polished by time. Their outlines are strange and resemble figures from fantasy dreams. The forests are home to rare birds and butterflies that are found nowhere else. The plateaus at the top are covered with dense mosses and white flowers growing directly from the stone. Huanggangshan, Anhui, is the highest point of the Yellow Mountains away from the trails. Huanggangshan is rarely visited by tourists as it is difficult to get here, but that is why it is quiet. From here you can see a whole chain of mountains drowning in clouds. At the top stands an ancient pagoda, almost lost among the rocks and moss. The morning begins with a light drizzle and birdsong over the cliffs. Meishan Mountain, Sichuan, pine forests and hidden Buddhist retreats. On the slopes of Meishan, pine trees grow thickly and small wooden buildings are hidden under their crowns. This is where Buddhist retreats take place, going on for weeks. Without electricity or communication, the air is filled with the scent of pine needles and mountain herbs. At night, you can hear the wind rushing through the gorges and whispering among the trees. Kunlunshan Mountain, Qinghai, is a vast desert mountain plateau. Kunlunshan stretches for many kilometers, where instead of forests there are rocks, sand, and thin ice. The altitude does not forgive weakness. The air is thin, and every step is given with effort. There are almost no human traces here, only ancient mounds and sacred signs on the rocks. At dawn, the light falls on the rock so that it seems that the earth breathes. Tianjishan Mountain, Hunan, are undeveloped gorges in the spirit of Avatar. The cliffs of Tianjishan rise like columns among the clouds, splicing into the sky. In remote areas, there are no roads, only narrow stone paths. Some areas resemble the scenery of sci-fi movies, but here everything is part of nature. There are green gorges with waterfalls hidden behind walls of foliage. Mount Dali, Yunnan, is outside the tourist town. Just above the bustling town of Dali, the forests begin, where the silence is interrupted only by the sounds of the wind. Shepherds with yaks and women gathering firewood can be found on the trails. Stone steps lead to abandoned pavilions that offer panoramas over High Lake. As the sun sets, the mountains turn a warm gold and fall silent until the next morning. The Zhongjiangshan Mountains, Jiangxi, are forested gorges and misty silence. The Zhongjiangshan Mountains are shrouded in thick mists that flow down the slopes, hiding everything around. The forest here stretches in a continuous green carpet, crisscrossed by deep gorges with stone streams. The trails lead through mossy rocks and bamboo groves, where the sky is almost invisible. In the mornings, the only sounds heard are the dewdrops falling from the leaves and the muffled sounds of distant mountain birds. Yumengguan Mountain, Shaanxi, ancient passages and mountain roads. Yumengguan is famous for its pass, through which troops and caravans passed back in the Han Dynasty. The remains of the ancient fortress still stand over the cliffs, looking towards the Great Wall. The ancient stone road loops along the slope, disappearing behind the ledges. Lost towers and guard posts hidden in the thickets are not uncommon in the mountains. Mount Baimo, Guangxi, is a karst cliffs covered with forests. Baimo is a chaos of limestone towers rising from dense forest. The rock formations here are riddled with time, and in their cracks grow trees with roots slithering down like snakes. Ancient paintings and traces of local tribes are found in the caves. The upper platforms offer views of the verdant jungle abyss and karst peaks stretching to the horizon. Huaishan Mountain, Gansu, is the flowering slopes and pastures of Huajia. In spring, the slopes of Huaishan are covered with pink and white flowers, which the locals call Huajia. This sacred plant is used in rituals and medicinal gatherings. Yaks and goats graze in the pastures, and yurts are set up in a semicircle at the foot of the hills. In June, local festivals are held with songs, dances, and campfires. Nandaoshan Mountain, Guangdong, is subtropical forest in cloud tops. The slopes of Nandaoshan have ancient camphor trees covered with moss and lianas. The humidity here is constant, and clouds often lie directly on the trails, making the whole forest ghostly. The peaks are lost in the haze, and only the distant sound of waterfalls suggests that somewhere below are streams flowing. The local monasteries are hidden among the greenery, as if merged with nature. Shidongshan Mountain, Guizhou, stone arches and forest trails. Shidongshan is known for its natural bridges and arches formed by the weathering of limestone. The trails lead through thickets of ferns and bamboo, where the humid air is saturated with the odors of earth and stone. Some arches are so large that entire groves pass under them. Hidden between the rocks are springs whose water is considered to be medicinal. Jitongshan Mountain, Hunan, rare herbs and misty forests. Jitongshan is famous for its botanical diversity, with plants found nowhere else. In the morning fog, the forest looks like a mirage. The tree trunks seem endless. On the steep slopes, medicinal herbs used in ancient medicine are gathered. The sounds of cicadas and the rustling wings of rare butterflies can be heard among the thickets. Fenshuilan Mountain, Sichuan. Misty lakes and mountain fields. In the silence of Fenshuilan are hidden lakes covered in haze, where the water hardly ripples. Dense grass grows along the shores, and above are pastures where yaks graze. In summer, the fields are covered with yellow and blue flowers, tended by the inhabitants of local farms. In the evenings, clouds rise over the valleys, colored in pink and gold shades. Mount Tashan, Henan, forgotten caves and waterfalls. On the slopes of Tashan are carved out ancient caves that once housed monks and hermits. Many of them are abandoned, but frescoes and stone altar niches have been preserved inside. Waterfalls framed by moss and wild grapes flow in the gorges. Some trails are completely overgrown, and you have to wade through the thickets to reach hidden grottos. Lomanshan Mountain, Sichuan. Geological fractures and mysterious forms. Lomanshan is a massif fractured by violent tectonic processes. The rocks here rise at strange angles, as if they were pushed up from within the earth. Some of the stone walls have smooth cuts, as if they were artificially created. In the morning, thick frost settles on these shapes, and the whole space looks unreal. Zhangjunshan Mountain, Jiangxi, is a general's mountain with impassable slopes. The name of the mountain is associated with the legend of a warlord who hid here from enemies. The slopes are steep and stony. There are almost no trails, only narrow passages among boulders. The top is covered with coniferous forests, where the air is saturated with resin. From the top, you can see a panorama of silent ridges disappearing into the haze. The Yongning Mountains, Ningxia, are barren peaks with mosques and ruins. The wind drives dust across the stony peaks of the Yunnan, where there is almost no vegetation. Among these dry hills are the ruins of old caravanserais and secluded mosques. Minarets rise above the deserted valleys and the walls are covered with faded ornaments. At night, a clear starry sky rises over the mountains without the slightest glow of the cities. Deshengling Mountains ears Sichuan, forest animals, and rare birds. The forests of Deshengling are home to spotted deer, pangolins, and many redbook bird species. The sounds of nature fill the space here. The cries of pheasants, the rustling of wings, the rustling of grass under the paws of animals. The paths are narrow and winding, often crossing with animal trails. In spring, rare wild peonies bloom on the edges of the forest. Mount Taibashan, Shanxi, snow-capped peaks and glacial lakes. Taibashan is the highest point of the Qinling mountain range, with peaks covered in perpetual snow. At an altitude of over 3,000 meters lie glacial lakes with crystal clear water. Stone fields dotted with lichens turn into ice slopes, where even in summer there is frost. Alpine plants and mountain goats, which have adapted to the harsh climate, can be found here. Lianfeng Mountain, Fujian. Two peaks and the tea villages between them. The two stone peaks of Lianfeng Mountains seem to guard the valley, which hides small villages surrounded by tea plantations. Oolong tea grows on the slopes, its leaves hand-picked at dawn. In the evenings, the valley is filled with the aroma of tea and smoke from the mud brick houses. Hiking trails link the villages, passing springs and stone terraces. Hangshan Mountain, Anhui, is the inspiration of Chinese poetry. The slopes of Hangshan Mountain are steeped in history, where Tang poets once roamed in the clouds in silence. Stone steps lead to the temple where, according to legend, the famous Hanshan bell was sounded. Old pine trees grow along the forest paths, their crowns intertwined, keeping out the sun. In spring, you can see plum blossoms blooming through the fog. The shadow, the smell, and the sound of the bell seem to dissolve in the air. Yalingshan Mountain, Fujian. Dense fogs and secluded pagodas. Yalingshan is hidden under dense fogs almost daily, especially in the mornings. An old pagoda stands on one of the hills, accessed by a winding path through the forest. The stone lanterns are covered in moss, and a thin trickle of water glides along the damp slabs. All around there is complete peace, disturbed only by the sound of a woodpecker or a splash in the mountain pond. The Minshan Mountains, Sichuan, are the hidden trails of the panda. The Mingshan Mountains are not only rocky massifs and icy streams, but also misty bamboo thickets where the rare panda can be spotted. Some trails that lead deep into the forests are almost invisible. Only gamekeepers and explorers use them. The forests here are humid, full of the smell of greenery and moss, often covered with dewdrops even at midday. The passes offer views of endless waves of green mountains. The Lotingshan Mountains, Yunnan, are flying rocks above the gorges. The huge limestone formations of the Lotingshan Mountains seem to float above the valleys as if suspended in the air. The gorges beneath them are full of bright green vegetation, with swift rivers flowing below. From some cliffs you can watch the clouds pass below the level of your gaze. Rare birds nest in the rock ledges, and orchids and aloes grow along the ledges. Sichuan mountains of Gansu are hidden Buddhist caves. On the slopes of Sichuan, among brown cliffs, are hidden caves with paintings that are more than 1,000 years old. They are hard to find. Only the old paths of local shepherds lead to these places. Inside are faded images of bodhisattvas covered in centuries-old dust. The silence here is so dense that you can hear your own heartbeat. Yushan Mountain, Henan. Silence, stone, water, and temple. Yushan is granite cliffs cut by streams and waterfalls that merge into small lakes. At the top stands a modest temple covered with gray tiles, around which, not a soul. The wind rustles the reeds and fallen leaves float on the water. The stone paths have almost disappeared under the grass, leading to the abandoned staircases at the foot of the slope. Mount Demoshan, Hunan, is a mountain of jagged cliffs and rushing streams. The cliffs of Demoshan look as if the earth itself has rushed upward, forming sharp ridges and deep cracks. Between them, mountain streams rush, foaming on the rocks and rushing off the ledges. Forests stretch along the gorges, with sparse pines hanging in the air above them. In winter, everything goes silent, and only the sound of water echoing between the steep walls can be heard. Fengjingshan Mountain, Jiangsu, small temples among pine trees. Hidden in the dense pine forest of Fengjingshan are tiny temples standing on stone platforms among roots and moss. The wooden doors are decorated with carvings, faded in places, and inside are the scents of incense and old wood. Streams run along the slopes, and the sounds of water accompany all movement along the trails. The morning here is greeted with the smell of pine needles and smoke from small smokers. Zhugeshan Mountain, Henan, traces of ancient settlements. On the Zhugeshan Plateau, you can find stone outlines of houses left from ancient villages. Time has almost wiped them out, but the foundations are still visible under the grass. In one area, the old masonry of a well filled with rainwater has been preserved. In the evenings at sunset, the slopes turn a golden color, and it becomes clear why people settled here. Mount Malishan, Tibetan border of Yunnan, are secluded plateaus. Malishan is spread out at high altitude, where the air is thin and sounds are deafening. The plateaus between the mountains stretch for kilometers, dotted with rocks, sparse shrubs, and herds of yaks. Among the stone ledges you can find white stupas, traces of monasteries that have stood here for centuries. In winter, icy winds pass over these lands, bending the grass to the ground. Sichuan Mountains, Yunnan, are the forgotten lands of ancient kingdoms. The slopes of the Sichuan Mountains are covered with forests where temples and palaces of vanished peoples once stood. Pottery and bronzes are still found in the soil, overgrown with moss and roots. In some places, the outlines of terraces that were once agricultural areas can be seen. The humid climate and lush vegetation have almost completely hidden the traces of civilization. Mount Jufengshan, Guangdong, is the mountain of 9 peaks in the clouds. The 9 peaks of Jufengshan rise from forested valleys. Each peak is different in shape and covered with dense thickets. Clouds often accumulate between the peaks, making them appear as if they are floating. On one of the peaks stands a dilapidated lighthouse shrine used as a landmark for caravans. The trails are narrow, winding between rocks, and require patience and caution. Qingqingshan Mountain, Sichuan, deep trails outside tourist areas. Unlike popular trails, Qingqingshan's deep trails lead through wet forests, old bridges, and nearly disappeared villages. Here, fog lingers between tree trunks until midday, and stone steps are covered with moss. By hidden streams, you can find overgrown altar niches left over from ancient Taoist practices. Occasionally, you'll encounter monks walking deep into the mountains along the way. The Wishan Mountains, Taiwan, are the island's highest point, little-known trails. Yushan towers over the entire island, but secluded trails stretch away from the popular routes. They lead through thickets of conifers, past cliffs, with views of a sea of clouds. In spring, alpine flowers bloom, covering the slopes with pink spots. The wind here is piercing, and even in summer the air remains cool. Yinshan Mountain, Nemengu, is the silvery hills covered by the wind. Yinshan is a low ridge covered with dry grass, shimmering silver in the sun. The wind is almost unrelenting here, driving rare clouds over the smooth slopes. Stone mounds and small stupas stand among the hills, indicating old nomadic camps. Dusty roads lead inland to silhouettes disappearing into the steppe. Qianfoshan Mountain, Shandong, is the mountain of 1,000 Buddhas, with caves and forests. There are hundreds of Buddha figures carved in the rocks of Qianfoshan. Some are almost erased, others are perfectly preserved. The forest around is dense, and sometimes the sculptures appear unexpectedly from the shadows of the trees. The entrances to the caves are decorated with bas-reliefs leading inside, where there is semi-darkness and the smell of incense. The silence is broken only by the rustling of leaves and the cry of wild peacocks. Tulishan Mountains, Guizhou, is the land of the Miao and Tong peoples. There are villages scattered on the slopes of the Tulishan Mountains, where the Miao and Tong people live in traditional ways. Tiled wooden houses stand on stilts above the slopes. All around are terraces where rice and corn are grown, and in the evenings the sounds of psaltery and singing can be heard. On festive days, women come out in silver jewelry and colored clothes that reflect the light in the sunset rays. Zhongshan Mountain, Hunan. Warm springs in the mountains. Zhongshan is famous for its geothermal springs hidden among the forest and rocks. The water here is warm all year round and steam rises above the smooth surface, mixing with the mist. Bamboo thickets grow around the springs and colorful birds sit on the rocks. Old wooden bridges lead to the baths dating back to the Ming era. Heilangshan Mountain, Ningxia. Desert ridges with rock art. Heilangshan are dry, sandy ridges where ancient petroglyphs are preserved in the gorges. Figures of people, hunting, and shamanic dances are carved directly into the dark stone. Wind and sand have gradually erased these images, but they are still legible. On the summits, there are often stone piles, ancient landmarks of nomads. Mount Alashan, Inner Mongolia. Ancient steppe trails and monasteries. Alashan stretches through endless steppes where the road is a trail of hooves and caravans. In the valley stand abandoned lamaseries, their walls still covered with paintings. The air is transparent and you can see the horizon for tens of kilometers. At dawn, the steppe is colored in golden and pink shades, and the cries of eagles come from the peaks. The world of China's hidden mountains is more than just geography. It's a special state of mind, when every turn of the trail reveals something more than a landscape. Silence where the memory of generations lives on. Stones that hold the breath of ancient times and light shining through the crowns as if time has stood still. There are no signposts, no rush, no cell phone signal. Just the wind, the woody aroma, and the feeling as if you were inside an ancient legend. Old pine needles often crunch under your feet, as if the forest is whispering something in its own language. At dawn, everything around you is colored in gold, and even the simplest stones begin to seem like ancient artifacts. Sometimes a deer comes out from behind a bend, and for a few seconds it seems that time has stopped. Each of these 60 mountain areas is like a separate story that cannot be retold without walking it with your feet, breathing its air, hearing its silence. These trails are not looking for a spectator, they are waiting for someone who is looking for meaning, and that is their strength. If you want silence deeper than just rest, and beauty purer than a picture on the screen, this is where you can find it. In these places, it is not the tourist, but the path itself that becomes the main thing, the one who leads and changes. Subscribe to the channel if you want to go further, to the place where the map ends and the present is just beginning.